Hi everybody, it's Kerrie here at the North East Autism Society, and today I've got George Watts with us, who's going to be talking to us about ADHD. So George, could you just introduce yourself for us?
Sure, I'm George, I'm autistic and ADHD, and I'm also a mum to an autistic and ADHD 6-year-old.
Okay, so first question I suppose is, how would you describe what is ADHD? I know this is a big question, but if you had to kind of summarise it a little bit, how would you put it into words?
I would summarise it in terms of executive functioning difficulties. So that's a whole list of things. That's a whole list of things. So like starting and stopping tasks, I've just totally forgotten the entire list.
Planning, problem solving, yeah,
problem solving, kind of prioritising, kind of having that sort of insight into sort of consequences. And I think ADHD is very much living in the moment. I sometimes describe it as like being a dog chasing a squirrel. So it's hard to escape that moment and to sort of take a step back and go, hey, is this a good idea? I don't know, because you get really caught up in the now.
Yeah.
And that creates all sorts of difficulties when you're trying to be a functional adult, or be in school, or it doesn't fit very well with how most of society works. So I think that's where the difficulties occur. It's not that ADHD in itself is a problem, it's that it's not a great fit with the rest of society that works in a different way and has different expectations of us.
Yeah, and obviously you've got an autistic diagnosis as well. So which came first, George, the ADHD or the autism?
So I was diagnosed with autism first, although ADHD was flagged up at the time, but it took me like another 5 years to get the ADHD diagnosis. So although I was fairly confident that I was ADHD as well, it wasn't kind of made official until just last year. So I'm now kind of starting with medication and actually treating the ADHD, which is obviously very different from autism.
Yeah.
So that's really been a big learning curve for me. I think something that's really interesting is this sort of interplay between being autistic and ADHD. So compared to ADHD on its own, I think being autistic, it just brings a really different dynamic into that mix. So with being autistic, the whole sort of love of routine thing, kind of wanting everything organized and sort of predictable. And then ADHD is this element of chaos that completely disrupts that. So not being able to stick to routines, not sort of following through on plans, not being able to complete things, starting 100 different projects but never finishing them. I think the conflict between that and the autistic drive for perfection is really hard.
So do you find you have kind of like, that must be almost like a mental tug of war in your head sometimes?
Yeah, it is. It is a real battle sort of internally, because, I think the autistic side of me really wants things to work like clockwork. But the ADHD side is going, oh, squirrel.
Yeah.
So once I get over that initial hurdle of starting something, I'm then kind of in the zone, but it's getting there, because people don't understand. I mean, there's a relationship with autistic inertia as well. So I think most people, when they need the loo, it occurs to them, they have a thought, oh, I need a wee, and they go for a wee. For autistic people with inertia, for people with executive functioning difficulties, which are also common in autism, so it's an autism and ADHD thing, that process from thinking, oh, I need the loo, to I should probably get up and go to the loo, and then remembering to get up and go to the loo, and it can be an hour later, you still need the loo. But it just doesn't happen, and I think other people find that really hard to understand.
And I think obviously, as with autism, there's a lot of misconceptions, isn't there, around ADHD, and I think children particularly can get labelled lazy and they can't be bothered, and it isn't that. It's exactly them executive functioning difficulties, isn't it? It's that actually getting started and doing things is really difficult.
I think a lot of people don't appreciate the amount of work we do just to try to keep up with our peers. And I think it's something that I'm actually quite resentful of, especially now medicating the ADHD, because I see how much easier it is for other people. And I do resent kind of how hard I've had to work to achieve the same ends in the past. And, you know, why wasn't I diagnosed as a kid? Is Rara sore? So it is. I do resent people for having it that much easier when, you know, if people had realised that I was ADHD at a much younger age and I had that medication from a much younger age, that there is an awful lot of work that I've done that I wouldn't necessarily have needed to do.
Yeah. Is there anything else then, George, you wanted to say about ADHD?
Just in terms of parenting differently, really. So I think we all have these sort of social expectations about how to parent, and a lot of that's based on how we were brought up. And so I find myself noticing things. I find myself, you know, telling my daughter off for things that I was told off for as a child that aren't really necessary. So like one that sticks in my mind was when she was blowing bubbles through a straw. And I remember sort of starting to tell her off and go, well, don't do that. You're not allowed to do that. And then stopping myself and remembering that I did that as a child and being told off for it and going, well, why? It's not doing any harm. Yes, the noise is a little bit irritating, but, you know, in the grand scheme of things, nobody's being harmed here. What's the issue? It's, you know, she needed that sensory input. She needs that stimulation. So we roll with it. And, you know, yes, she's bouncing off the walls quite regularly, but allowing her to do that without judgment, I think, is really an investment in her future mental health. Because I think, you know, kids like her are just told off and told off and told off constantly. And the impact that has long term is huge. You know, the impact that had on me as an undiagnosed ADHD kid was huge. I think it's about sort of adjusting those expectations.
Yeah, and because I think a lot of our families get quite stressed when other parents say, well, oh, you shouldn't have screens, for example, at dinner time. At bedtime, you should do this A, B, C, D, E, F, G routine, when actually the reality is we've got to be really flexible with our children and do it differently, and that's okay.
You do what works for you, and there is no right or wrong way, and there's nothing worse than another parent saying, oh, well, this works for my little Johnny, and if you just try this, try a reward chart, you know.
But people
there is no reward chart on this earth that is going to work for my child, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's all about what you're saying. It's all about being a bit more flexible, just understanding and getting to know your child really well. I think that's key as well, isn't it? And just allowing yourself to be flexible. I think families think they've got to follow this golden rule book of we must do it this way. And I think it's okay to deviate from that.
I think, doing what works for the individual, and kind of forgiving yourself if that looks different from other people. So I think a lot of it is about good self-care as parents, because it is difficult.
So tell me about sleep, George. Do you get to sleep or not?
I sometimes get to sleep. It's a privilege, not a right. I've always struggled with sleep. A couple of years ago, I was finally prescribed melatonin, which makes a difference. And again, my daughter we do not produce enough melatonin. We don't, I think it's a sort of, I don't know whether it's an autism and ADHD thing. A lot of autistic people struggle with sleep. I suspect a lot of ADHD people also do. It's that sort of not being able to wind down and that sort of hyperactive mind and body sort of, you know, trying to actually slow down. I always said my daughter when she was younger, she didn't get tired, she got angry. So she would never sort of slow down and sort of have a nap. She would just get more and more hyper.
Of course.
So that would be how the tiredness would sort of come out. And then the impact of tiredness on all of our behaviour can be huge.
I think that's it, isn't it? I think we underestimate the importance of sleep, and a lot of the families that I work with, it's often the sleep. If we can get that right in the beginning, you know, you're going to struggle to do very much, really, if the whole household is absolutely shattered and hasn't slept for weeks on end. So, I mean, is there any? Some of our young people use different strategies, I suppose, for kind of trying to empty the mind at night. So we've got people that use worry monsters, or you know, they write little notes and put them under the pillow, all these different things that work for some but don't work for others. Is there anything that you've tried like that in terms of a strategy before bed, or would it just...
I feel like we tried an awful lot of strategies, and really we needed the melatonin. I mean, the difference in my daughter's behaviour after we started the melatonin was huge, because she was just massively overtired. I'm quite a big fan of medication in that respect. I think if I had to read that book, The Rabbit Who Wants to Go to Sleep, one more time.
I know that one.
You know, that's a special form of torture. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's about what works for the individual. So I don't think there's necessarily a right way. I know there's the whole sort of sleep hygiene thing where people say, oh, no screens before bedtime and things like that, and I'm sure there's good science supporting that. However, I do also know autistic kids who need their screens to wind down. You know, I'd say do what works for you.
Absolutely. Okay.